Hey, hello everyone. Sorry, I'm getting everything set up. Hey y'all, how's it going? Welcome to AP World Wednesdays on Antisocial Studies. I'm Emily Glankler. I'm going to be going live every single Wednesday night from now until the AP World History test. And now we're getting into our content reviews. So the last 2 weeks, if you haven't joined yet, then the last 2 weeks I went over the different sections of the test. So 2 weeks ago, I did like the multiple choice and the SAQ. Last week, I did the bigger essays, the LEQ and the DBQ. And then today, we're getting into content. So I'm happy to talk through units 1 and 2, but I'm going live because I want to answer your questions. So if y'all will, say hi in the chat, tell me who you are, tell me where you're from. I was about to start, never mind, singing a little Nas X song. But if y'all will just let me know in the chat, is there something from unit 1 and 2 that you've always been confused about? Something you want to make sure that I talk about in this next hour? And I'm excited to start talking about the actual content. It's way more fun and way more interesting than talking about DBQs. So again, say hi in the chat. Tell me who you are. Tell me if you're a student, if you're a teacher, if you're just here. If so, hey, awesome. Thanks. All right. So units 1 and 2 are 1200 to 1450, and Unit 1 is so weird, y'all. Unit 1 is so weird. Ask any AP World History teacher. We all are so confused by Unit 1 because Unit 1 just starts in the middle of an era. Anyone who's pretty familiar with history knows that the year 1200 is just right smack dab in the middle of an era. So they really should have started this at 600, right? 600 to 1450. Hey, welcome back, Gummy. And so they just started in the year 1200, which really throws everybody off. What I call Unit 1 is it's basically our roll call era. It's okay, we're time machine, we're dropped into the year 1200, Bill and Ted style, and now we just have to look around and be where are we? Okay, what's going on in China? What's going on in Asia? Whatever, right? And so it's really weird because Unit 1 and Unit 2 doesn't really have any narrative. There's no narrative. There's no real chronology. There's a few events, obviously, kind of the Mongols conquer a lot of places, but otherwise you're just sort of hopping around, which is why if it feels a little disjointed, that's accurate. So the skill that you want to make sure that you're focusing on when you're studying Unit 1 and 2, but Unit 1 especially, is comparison. What you are going to be asked to do, if you're asked to do anything with Unit 1, is you're just going to be asked to compare. So really, the main topic that the AP exam cares about for Unit 1 is this. They want you to be able to talk about processes of state formation. How are states, meaning governments, what we would maybe think of today as a country, and what they want to know is how are those states coming into existence, and then how are they continuing to exist? So the way I've been saying it all year is how are states gaining and maintaining power, right? And so you want to know that for the major states that we are learning about, which I'll kind of highlight for you here. And then you also want to be able to make comparisons, right? Are different states doing similar things to gain power? Are some states doing something different? And so when you're going back and reviewing Unit 1, first of all, you should make sure to know that Unit 1 and 2 are somewhat de-emphasized on the test, same as Unit 9. So the first unit and kind of the last unit are less on the test. That doesn't mean you could still get, if you're taking the paper test, you could still get an LEQ from Unit 1, but you'll have 2 other options. You'll probably get a short answer question from Unit 1 and 2, but the DBQ will not be from this era. They've already told us the DBQ is not going to be from Units 1 or 2. So really what you need to worry about, hey y'all, ooh, I'm excited someone's from Texas. I'm from Texas too, yeehaw, I'm from Austin. So what you really want to know about Unit 1 is just you need enough detail to either answer a multiple choice question or answer a short answer question, right? Because let's think about this strategically. They've told us the DBQ is not going to come from before 1450. So the DBQ will not be from Units 1 and 2. Again, if you're taking the paper test, the LEQ might, but you'll have 2 other prompts. So if you want to be really strategic, you just need to know 1 layer of depth about these civilizations in Unit 1. Enough to either identify something in a multiple choice question, see a document about Mansa Musa and go, oh, okay, I know the basics about him and Mali. Or to be able to answer a short answer question, right? Which when you're thinking about something, if you're studying like, how did the Song maintain power? And you're thinking, well, Confucianism was one way, or the civil service exam. Okay, do you know enough about that to be able to answer it in a 2 to 3 sentence SAQ? If so, you're fine. Move on, right? So this should be the unit that you are spending the least amount of time reviewing. You just want to kind of jog your memory and then go. Oh, San Marcos. I went to grad school at Texas State. That's awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna stay on this map for a little while, and I'm really hoping y'all have questions. I have plenty to talk about. I can ramble and rant about the late post-classical era all night, but I really hope y'all have questions. If there's something specific, if you're seeing something on the map and you're like, ooh, my teacher never talked about that, or I was always really confused about that civilization, now's the time. What I really just want us to notice while y'all are putting your questions in the chat is that we kind of have 2 types of states in this era. If we want to really oversimplify, right? If we want to really oversimplify, we have bigger kind of land-based empires. I'll use green for that because like green is land. I don't know. We have kind of these bigger land-based empires. We'll consider the Byzantines, the Mongols, duh, right? So you have those, which are pretty, they're traditional, right? They control a lot of land. They have more old school. If you're familiar with like the classical era, right? The Roman Empire, that sort of thing, they're still using a lot of those tactics. And then we have smaller states, even sometimes city-states, who are more just like the intermediaries between these bigger land-based empires. So we have the city-states along the Swahili coast. We have like the Vijayanagara along in southern India. We have the different Southeast Asian kind of island kingdoms, that sort of thing. Khmer is actually a traditional land-based empire. So the point, first of all, is just in your brain, you can sort of distinguish between those two, right? That there's going to be these kind of bigger land-based empires, and then a lot of them are going to use similar tactics to gain and maintain power. And then there's going to be kind of smaller states or even city-states that are rising up, and they're benefiting from the trade to and from these bigger empires. Basically, everyone wants to get to Asia. That is like, if I had to summarize this class from 1200 to 1900, if I had to summarize this class from units 1 to unit 6, I would just say, everyone wants to get to Asia. Like, that's it. That's what it all comes down to, right? I would argue even Teddy Roosevelt building the Panama Canal in the 1900s is like, everyone just wants to get to Asia. Okay. So I'm going to skim through the chat. Yeah, I can explain the whole thing. So let's start over here in Asia, because a lot of students are like, what's happening in South and Southeast Asia? It's slightly confusing for people like me, and you might be similar, who have never heard of these before, right? Obviously, if you are from South or Southeast Asia, these are like the classical empires that you've learned about. But so the biggest one, the most kind of traditionally like large land-based empire one, is going to be Delhi. Delhi is the things you need to know about it is it's the first Islamic empire in India, right? So Delhi, it was Afghan Muslims who were kind of on the fringes of the Abbasid Caliphate. They came and invaded in northern India. Just side note, India, or really what we should call South Asia, this whole subcontinent, is like almost impossible to rule. It is almost, if anyone ever says like, oh, this so-and-so ruled India. No, they didn't. They ruled like a part of India. It's always been incredibly diverse. It's always been incredibly decentralized. And so at best, right, at the height, the Delhi Sultanate really just kind of control like the top half, right? And so what you would want to know about them is that they're the first Islamic government to rule over the Hindu majority in India. They come in and actually kind of assimilate into the caste system. They just kind of put their leadership on top, but like Muslims actually just sort of work their way into that social hierarchy as well, just based on kind of where they would fall. And even though they come in and assert kind of themselves as an Islamic state, the vast majority of India remains Hindu, right? And so basically from the Delhi Sultanate on until really the partition of India into India and Pakistan is just going to be this like minority government of a Muslim government ruling over a Hindu majority, and like in varying degrees of success. The other thing you might want to know is that as Muslims start to come into the continent, so one of the big themes of this time period is the spread of Islam, right? Islam gets founded in around the 600s. And so by this point, the Abbasid Caliphate is like huge and very tolerant and like relatively speaking to other civilizations. They're really openly encouraging of trade. They want to get, their Arab and their Muslim traders out there. They want to try to convert people to Islam, partly because like it's their faith that they believe in, but also for trading benefits. But India and the Delhi Sultanate is an exception because they're like, we're good. We have Hinduism. We're already in the middle of all these trade routes. We don't need that. And so instead, Muslims have to come in and conquer. So if you were asked to kind of explain, like, why do Muslims have to violently conquer India, whereas they go over here to Mali and Sundiata's like, heck yeah, come on, bring me Islam. And it's partly just because Mali or some of these other Sudanic states are trying to like get incorporated into the trade routes. So like anything they can do to have those extra benefits is great. India's like sitting pretty, right? They've been in the middle of all of these trade routes for hundreds or thousands of years, and they have a really solid like unifying religion in Hinduism. So if Muslims want to control India, they have to conquer it. Okay, this one, Vijayanagara. Keep in mind the AP exam is not a spelling test. They are not going to judge you if you do not spell this right or if you miss an A, but like, do your best. Vijayanagara. This is a Hindu kingdom that comes about in southern India. And one of the things really just to note, honestly, like, why I mention Vijayanagara with my students is I'm like, it's really good as an illustrative example that like Hinduism was still very powerful in the subcontinent, right? That even when outsiders like Delhi and later the descendants of the Mongols with the Mughal Empire, like we really oversimplify India and just say, oh, the Delhi Sultanate, they controlled all of India. No, they didn't. There's actually a ton of different kingdoms in there. And so the Vijayanagara is one example. The other thing that's happening that we'll talk about in a little bit later is there's also kind of a Hindu revival movement coming out of the southern half of the continent, kind of in response to the arrival of Islam. That's called the Bhakti movement. If you're familiar with the Protestant Reformation, the Bhakti movement is kind of like that for Hinduism. It's a little bit more, it kind of promotes more gender equality, it promotes more like openness, kind of like reading the text yourself, that sort of thing. Okay. So Imelda, like the people in India do not like want the Muslims to take over. They have to violently conquer India. In Africa, they don't let the Muslims take over, but they convert to Islam, right? So if you are the king of Mali, like Mansa Musa is going to be, it is in your best interest to be a Muslim because now you become part of Dar al-Islam, right? Remember, Dar al-Islam is like this huge area where within it, it's like, there's all these rules about, like in the Quran, there's all these rules about like the things a Muslim can't do to another Muslim, right? You can't impose a lot of different taxes on other Muslims. You can't charge them interest on loans. There's all these different things. And so being part of Dar al-Islam is a huge benefit. I want to be really clear too. Islam's just a really popular religion. It's like a vastly popular religion. It is by far in this time period the most equal of the religions that we see, especially the major religions. So there are other just faith-based reasons why people convert to Islam. But it also is, if you're part of Dar al-Islam, like you have a ton of benefits and you have a lot of connections that you can sort of make. Right? It's like when people like come out of college and they've like were in a fraternity with someone else and then they go to the job interview, they're like, hey, right? I mean, it's that, but then way heightened because it's also this like, belief. All right. So, yes, I'll go over Al-Andalus in just a second. Just to kind of wrap up Southeast Asia. The other thing to know is that like these Southeast Asian kingdoms, again, what I kind of told my students is I would know like, okay, maybe know one or more of these. These are Hindu, Buddhist, sea-based kingdoms. So what that means is they were Hindu, then Buddhism comes in, it kind of becomes a mix of both. Same thing happens with the Khmer. Eventually Islam is going to come in, like Malacca is actually a sultanate, which when you see the word sultan, that is specifically an Islamic ruler, right? So if you see a sultanate, it's an Islamic state. And so these states all here are a really good illustrative example of a few things. They're a really good example of the cultural diffusion of different religions, right? Because you have like a Hindu social hierarchy, but then you often have like Buddhist leadership. And then at some point you have Muslims coming in and setting up diasporic communities or even their own governments in Malacca, right? So if you wanted to talk about like cultural diffusion and the spread of religion along trade routes, these sea-based kingdoms would be really helpful. And it's also just a good example of like a different type of empire, right? Because, for example, the Majapahit, if you just want to know one, the Majapahit are like a sea-based tributary kingdom. So what that means is like they really only control this one island, but then they have like 98 other tributaries, little islands, parts of islands that pay tribute to them. And they also developed like an alliance and sort of a trading relationship with nomadic sea people. They're called sea nomads. They're not pirates. They're different than pirates. Who would basically like force people to come into this strait so that then they could tax them. So they had kind of like an agreement with these nomadic groups. So again, if you want to talk about the importance of nomads, everyone just goes to the Mongols. I don't know, talk about sea nomads. I think it's really cool. And then again, you might want to know the Khmer just as an example of a Southeast Asian kingdom that is more land-based. They are an agricultural kingdom that in a lot of ways is like the bread basket of Southeast Asia, right? So they're going to be a really powerful agricultural kingdom. They, along with Vietnam, are the ones who developed champa rice that's going to go to the Song dynasty and lead to population explosion. Khmer also have Angkor, which is their capital city, which is the largest city in the world in terms of size, all the way until London in the 1800s. So, and they have like Angkor Wat, which is their huge temple, which was Hindu and then is Buddhist. So again, all of these, you do not need to know like the details of these. You don't need to know like the names of all their different rulers, but you would maybe want to know enough about them. Like these are good examples of culturally mixed states that have a lot of different religious influences, and they're also states that are really benefiting off of this Indian Ocean trade with everyone trying to get to China from India, Africa, the Middle East. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about the Islamic Golden Age for a second. Daniel, is that Daniel? I taught a student named Daniel Geld. Is this a different Daniel Geld? If so, I really want to know. If it's the Daniel Geld I'm thinking of, he wrote a parody to a musical and performed it in my class, and I was very impressed. Okay, if not, that's fine. I like you too. So, the Islamic Golden Age is, yeah, it's pretty awesome. So if we're looking at Dar al-Islam, which just means kind of like the world of Islam, the house of Islam, it just means all of these different Islamic states, but it's really epitomized by the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasid Caliphate is considered the golden age of Islamic culture. And so the things you would want to know about them are, they are like massively promoting, Daniel, hi! Oh, that's so awesome. Okay. They are massively promoting trade, like way more than any other state except possibly the Song dynasty. If you're only going to study two civilizations from this era, it should be the Abbasids and the Song. That's it. If you only have space in your brain for two civilizations, it should be those two. Those two are like specifically named in the CED. Like 1.1 is the Song dynasty and 1.2 is basically the Abbasid Caliphate. So, and really they have a ton in common, right? What they have in common is that they are both states that are actively promoting trade and innovation. And that's huge. That's why they're so successful. So they both have like stabilizing belief systems. The Song have Confucianism, and which provides some social hierarchy, so that keeps people relatively happy and stable. The Abbasids have Islam, and the Abbasids, when they took over from the Umayyad Caliphate, they opened up Islam to everyone. The Umayyads before them had said Islam was an ethnic religion. You had to be Arab. You had to be of the Arab ethnicity to be a Muslim. And the Abbasids took over and said, no, it's universal. It's open to everyone. That also makes them very popular for a very long time. They're both actively promoting innovation with like state-sponsored innovation. The Song are gonna expand their university system and actively invite men, young men from like the countryside and rural areas. They're gonna expand their civil service exam system. The Abbasids, like one of the Abbasid caliphs literally just founds the House of Wisdom. I did a whole deep dive on my YouTube channel about the House of Wisdom if you want to go in and learn about that, because it's a really good illustrative example. And so those are some things that they have in common. They have, they all still have relatively like authoritarian leadership that's backed by religion. In the song, it's like the Mandate of Heaven, and the Abbasid there, the Caliph, which means like the ruler of the Islamic world. But they're also actively promoting trade and exchange, right? So the Song dynasty has Hangzhou, which is like one of the largest cities in the world, and it's like, watched a documentary about Hangzhou, and it's super interesting. Like during this time, they eliminated curfews. They had originally, like a lot of these cities had curfews because, you know, you don't have like electricity and it gets really dangerous at night. And the Song in Hangzhou eliminated curfews and were like, no, we want to encourage people to go out and mingle and get to know each other. They had like different kind of parts of town. They had like the Arab part of town, the Jewish part of town, whatever. And they encouraged them to kind of mix and get together and meet. In Hangzhou, there was a gay club. Like that's how like open and tolerant and sort of like open to new idea, or not new ideas, but kind of different ideas they were. In the Abbasid Caliphate, I call Baghdad like the New York City of this era. It is like someone said like like Rohan said, basically these centers of trade like Hangzhou and the Song dynasty, Baghdad, Constantinople, they are just like meeting points. I mean, think about the difference between New York City and, I don't know, a city I've never heard of in New York, right? It's like that's where people go, and that's where there's going to be a lot more diversity, and that has to be actively promoted by the government. And the Abbasid and the Song do that. Another good example would be as part of Dar al-Islam, if you want another example of promoting knowledge and innovation, would be Al-Andalus. So Al-Andalus is like the Spanish wing of Dar al-Islam. This is like, these are the people that like Shakespeare's going to call the Moors in Spain. And they set up really kind of the main center of learning in medieval Europe. So like Cordoba is one of the main cities, Toledo is another one, where they have these huge libraries and they sponsor these translation movements like we had in Baghdad with the House of Wisdom. And they actively invite Jews to come. A lot of Jews are being expelled from medieval Christian Europe, and they're being invited into the Islamic world because Jews are seen as an asset both in trading relationships, because since they have been forced into a diaspora, there are Jewish communities kind of all around the world at this time. And also they provide like a link between the Islamic world and the Judeo-Christian world. And so in Al-Andalus, like at the Library of Cordoba, also in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, you have these translation movements where Arab scholars are gathering all the knowledge from the ancient and classical world and then sitting down and translating it. And a lot of Jews help them with that. And it's really the only reason why Europe is going to be able to like Renaissance later on, right? They're going to like discover these documents. They're not finding the original Plato. They're finding like the Arab translation of it that was then often translated into a vernacular European language by Jews. So thanks, y'all. All right. Vivian, I'm doing these live streams every Wednesday. So every Wednesday, AP World Wednesday. This one's Unit 1 and 2. We're doing Unit 3 and 4 next. So on and so forth until the AP exam. All right. So I'm seeing a few questions about things that are like before this time period. Just as a heads up, the test is going to start in the year 1200. That's it. There's nothing before 1200. So you might have in your class learned about, because your school might require you to learn about ancient Greece and Rome and Alexander and the Qin and the Han and whatever. Great. None of that's going to be on the AP test. It's starting in 1200. Okay. Let's go to some of the big ideas. So again, some of the big ideas here are going to be like, you might want to know, like a lot of states are using belief systems right now to gain legitimacy. And so you would want to have some examples of this. Like I would anticipate maybe an SAQ that might have, I don't know, an image like this one of Aztec sacrifice, and they're like ripping out his heart. That'd be pretty brutal, but I mean, the College Board has done worse. So, and then they might be like, okay, just, identify and explain one way that, this exemplifies a development from 1200 to 1450, right? And so you have different ways that they're using belief systems. And really one of the ways to think about it is that states and leaders are either using belief systems to assert dominance over another group, or they're using it as a unifying tool to unite a diverse empire. And so, for example, I would argue the Aztecs are part of that like dominance, right? They're using the tribute system and they're using sacrifice as a political tool. Yes, it's also a religious tool, but it's also a tool, a method of control to kind of assert their dominance over the surrounding civilizations in Mesoamerica. Same thing in the Delhi Sultanate. This is a building called, I'm sorry if I say it wrong, I've tried to learn how to say it, the Qutub Minar. And this is basically a mosque and a minaret, which is an Islamic building, but it was literally built by taking the bricks and the stones of a Hindu temple. So when the Muslims come in and establish the Delhi Sultanate, this is like a physical example of them taking and rebuilding to kind of assert their dominance. Now, for both of these, right, they are often in the minority, right? Like the majority of India is still Hindu, right? And so these, the Aztecs or the Delhi Sultanate, would be an example of a group using religion as a way to kind of assert their dominance and maintain control over a larger population. But then there are other places that are using it as a way to kind of provide unity. Really, the best two examples are going to be Islam, Dar al-Islam, but then also the Confucian system in China. Like, China's great because if you learn a decent amount about China, like if you just get pretty familiar with the Mandate of Heaven, Confucianism, and the civil service exam and bureaucracy, like that's China from like 1200 till 1911. I mean, there's other stuff in there too. But so I would spend a little bit of time making sure you understand like Confucianism, because it's something you can talk about all the way until we get to the revolution of 1911, right? So these are scholars who are studying or taking the civil service exam. So again, this is really like this is the key to China's stability, is this Confucian system, which the Song dynasty don't invent, but they reinforce. And so the idea that any man across China can, in theory, study, pass these exams, work their way up to becoming like the advisors to the emperor, that provides a ton of stability and a ton of unity within China. Everyone feels like they could be a part of the government. Now, are they? No, it's mostly rich people who can afford like private tutors and stuff, but at least they feel like they can. And you might have a guy from your village who was really smart, who now is in the bureaucracy, and you now feel more connected to the government because you're like, oh yeah, so-and-so's in there too. It feels more accessible. So it's not democracy, but it has some of the same effects as democracy, where it kind of feels like it's working for you, even though, like, I think Daniel even said in the chat, like, they're still pretty legalistic. They still have pretty harsh laws, that sort of thing. They're not a super equal society, but it feels like you have that opportunity. You also have over here, this would be a great example of syncretism. Syncretism is something I love talking about from this time period. It basically means you take different cultures and mix them together to create something new. The something new is the important part of that, right? Like this, the Qutub Minar right here is not syncretism, it's just dominance. It's like, hey, we took what was Hindu and now we're turning it into a mosque. Or when the Aztecs, spoiler alert, get conquered, right? The Spanish are just going to take the stones from their temple and then just build a cathedral. That's not syncretism. Syncretism is when you take two or more cultures and they mix and make something new. So this is a mosque that was built under Mansa Musa in Mali. But you notice, like, it's a mosque. It has the minaret, which we see over here too, but it's built with like mud bricks, the way things are built in a lot of sub-Saharan African civilizations. So I will just tell you right now, if you see a picture and it's of a mosque in Africa, the answer is probably syncretism. It's probably something about syncretism. Every few years, they show a picture of a mosque like this, and they'll be like, the image above is best exemplifies which development. And then you're like, the introduction of new belief systems through trade routes, or something that relates to like Islam coming in, mixing with the local religion. So, lastly, we have medieval Europe just hanging out, kind of struggling. They're not really struggling, but they're just not unified, right? Medieval Europe is the exception. Most of these other places have pretty strong, powerful, unified states that are kind of holding down the fort in each region, right? The Song dynasty in East Asia, whatever. Medieval Europe has kind of collapsed. You have the Byzantines in modern day Turkey for the most part, but really medieval Europe is completely decentralized. And so still though, belief systems are providing some unity, right? This is a monastery. So like the Catholic Church is really the only thing providing some sort of unity and stability in medieval Europe. They're really the only source of like education. They're really the only source of in a lot of places like the law, right? Just using canon law. Like when the government breaks down, it's like, okay, well, we're just going to do what the church tells us to do, that sort of thing. They're actually not going around and like torturing each other nearly as much as we think they were, but yeah. Yes, Daniel, I used to always say digging in the dirt for more dirt. I've tried to move away from that because I feel like they were probably doing more than that, but I picture them Monty Python-esque every single time. Okay. Rohan, I'm so glad. Yay, thanks. I just happened to look when Christina's asking about dates. Dates are not important. You don't need to know dates. Okay, but here's what you do need. So you do not need to memorize dates. You do not need to memorize like the Aztec Empire was conquered in 1519 and blah, 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 blah. But yes, Gina, it's the chronology. You want to know like cause and effect. So you would want to know, for example, here's what I will say. The only dates I think you like 100% should know are the dates of the different eras. So like 1200 to 1450. If you're going to memorize dates, then memorize 4 years, right? You want to memorize like 1200, 1450, 1750, 1900, right? Because those are like the little marker events. And so if you get an essay, they'll probably put your essay within those parameters for the most part, right? They'll probably, if they're giving you an LEQ, if you're taking the paper test, or if they're giving you a DBQ, they'll probably say like, evaluate the blah, 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 blah from 1750 to 1900. And so the only part of this that I would just kind of memorize is like, I would at least have, okay, like even if it's this map, these maps, by the way, are up on my website at antisocialstudies.org. And I have blank ones where you can practice filling them in, even though geography is not super important, but if you want to just study. And I also have then the filled in ones. But if nothing else, I think the only thing you should kind of memorize is you should be able to, on the morning of the test, be like, 1200 to 1450, and then just really quickly jot out like the 5 or so main civilizations. Be like, okay, 1200 1450, that's Song, Dar al-Islam, medieval Europe, Southeast Asia, Aztec, Inca, right? Like just to kind of jog your memory and be like, all right, that's what, and we're talking about Silk Road, that sort of thing. And then you'd want to be able to go like 1450 to 1750, well, 1492, so we're talking about like exploration, Columbian exchange, gunpowder empires. Like that would be the only part of this I would suggest you just memorize. Just so that even like when the test starts, if you're taking the paper test, just as soon as you can, you just write that down. And so you just have that as a reference. So you're not constantly having to like go back and forth in time. One nice thing is that the multiple choice section will go in order, in chronological order. So like it'll start in the first era and it'll work its way to the end. So it won't be bouncing you all around, which is really nice. So again, you don't need to know dates like specifically, but you need to know chronology. And I will say, I'm probably going to put on my website and I'll post it on Instagram and stuff too, like just a little list of like some other dates that I just feel like can be helpful. Just because, you know, if you get a document in the DBQ, right, and it's a document from the Americas in 1550, like it'd be helpful to know like, oh yeah, that's after the conquest of the Aztecs. If it's in Mexico, that sort of thing. So, okay. So we talked about belief systems. How are states promoting innovation and exchange? That's what we talked about. The two best examples are going to be the Song Dynasty and the Abbasid Caliphate, but I'll go over some other examples too. Like this is the Song Dynasty. This is Hangzhou, according to like a Song Dynasty scroll. This scroll is actually enormous. I can't remember how long it is, but it's like a whole wall of like a scroll that shows you like the whole city, and you notice like it looks pretty cool and fun and crowded and lively and bustling, and there's trade. So the Song Dynasty promote innovation and exchange. They have their own, some people call him the Chinese Da Vinci, and I'm like, he came before Da Vinci. So his name is Su Song. He was like an inventor. China's Da Vinci. I'm putting that in quotes because I think that's garbage. Da Vinci is Europe's Su Song. But so they do actively promote innovation. And a lot of the innovations that are coming out of China are helpful with trade. So we're talking about like the 4 great innovations, right? We're talking about like paper, printing, gunpowder, the compass. Ooh, I just almost blanked on that one. We're talking about like paper money. Like a lot of the innovations are specifically to help make trade easier, right? So in units 1 and 2 is when it's very clear that like the more innovative states are the ones who are benefiting from trade. And then by benefiting from trade, they're getting wealthier to then promote more innovation, right? It's just like it's a snowball effect. We also see that in, this is a picture from the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, right? That translation movement. But we also have they're not just translating text, they're also like creating the fields of like algebra. They're doing a lot for astronomy. Yeah, again, I did a deep dive on one of the scientists from the House of Wisdom, and he's super fascinating too. Some other examples of promoting trade and promoting innovation and exchange, if you need a few more, would be the Inca are just incredibly innovative. The Inca are my favorite civilization of all time. I'm including my own in that. They're incredibly innovative partly because all the things they do in isolation, and they do it through manual labor because llamas are useless. Llamas are cute and useless. Like, I've seen it. A llama can carry 30 pounds, and if you load it with more than 30 pounds, it just like slides and then doesn't move. So they don't have domesticated animals to build anything. So when you see Machu Picchu, like that was built with human hands, and you see like one stone will weigh like a ton, literally a ton, right? They build bridges across the Andes. They have a road system that is so good that it connects the Incan Empire together to where an Incan runner in like the 1400s could travel from Cusco down to the coast where Lima is faster than a bus can travel today in 2021. Like, it takes a bus longer, and I've been on that bus, to go from Cusco to the sea than it did an Incan runner to run from Cusco to the sea, because their road system through the mountains was that good, right? They are very innovative with terrace farming. Daniel, I've been converted. I know, from the Aztecs to the Inca. So they also are really innovative with terrace farming and terrace agriculture, to where they're scientists, right? They're figuring out and doing experiments, and they get to the point where they can grow potatoes and they can grow other crops at like 11,000 feet in altitude. My favorite fact that you can just throw in there somewhere if you want to is that when the Spanish conquered the Inca, they estimated that the Inca had over 4,200 different types of potatoes. That's like crop diversity, right? Pax Mongolica that's a really good question. So if you're going to be asked about the Mongols, you're not going to be asked about like a pile of severed heads in the middle of the city. And I'm really sorry. I know a lot of us really like to talk about that side of the Mongols, but you're not going to be asked about just like the brutality of the Mongols. You're not going to be asked about like Genghis Khan's superhero origin story of like, I must avenge my father's poisoning. What you're going to be asked about is like the Mongol rule, or the impact of the Mongols. And so Mongol rule is characterized by the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. So ironically, right, after the Mongols conquer most of Central Asia and, other parts, they then assert under Genghis Khan such stability and like strict law and order that it is incredibly safe. So like Marco Polo is able to walk from Italy to China safely. And he's like, yeah, I'm good, not concerned. We have all these writings from travelers who are like, I literally can walk without protection and be carrying like the gold that I just got from my trade, and I can walk dozens of miles and I'm not worried about being robbed because I know I'm in the Mongol Empire, right? And it's partly because the Mongols are so brutal that everyone's like, I'm not gonna mess with them, right? So they create this environment where also most of the Silk Road gets unified under just one ruler, which makes it way more efficient too. That's really one of the main reasons why they conquered the land that they did. I think we have this idea that Genghis Khan was just this barbarian who was like, land, I just want land, and like had no plan. He conquered the Silk Road on purpose. He was like, I want to control this important trade route. And he did. And then everyone else benefited from it too, right? So yes, the Songhet conquered. We now have the Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty. But like China, India, Europe, sorry, Black Death. But otherwise, like all these innovations and all these cultures are spreading back and forth, and they're all benefiting from the stability of the Mongol rule. And to that point about there being years and dates you should know, one of the ones I always commit to memory because I find it really helpful is that, and I'm going to fact check myself. I just want to make sure I don't say something wrong because it's going to be saved on YouTube. is there's the Mongol century, which is, okay, I knew I was right, but then I started second guessing myself. So like the mid like 1200s, 1250-ish to 1350-ish is known as the Mongol century. That might be something I'll just commit to your memory for context, because that's really the dividing line in this era is like, okay, is it pre-Mongol, is it post-Mongol, right? And so pre-Mongol, we're talking like the Crusades, right? We're talking like the Song dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate, whatever. Post-Mongol, we're talking, I mean, the Mongol Empire, and then really like the kind of breakdown of those traditional empires that are going to be replaced by something new in the next era. So, you know, medieval Europe kind of promotes innovation, but really like this, for example, is part of that translation movement. So this is like an Arab book of medicine that was translated by an Italian in Arab Spain, Muslim Spain, right? So this is a great example. Like if innovation and new ideas are being promoted in Europe, it's in places that are controlled by the Muslims. Sorry, I'm just laughing at you all in the chat. I love it. Okay, last thing, how do states benefit from trade? I mean, like, they get a lot of stuff. They get a lot of stuff and they get a lot of power, right? So if a state can control an important trade route or an important point of a trade route, they're going to get super rich. I think that's where those Southeast Asian kingdoms can be really helpful as an illustrative example, right? If you can control this strait, which is what the Majapahit did, well, first the Srivijaya, then the Majapahit, great. Right, you don't have to be that big. You don't have to have that much. If you can just fortify and control this, all of a sudden, if anyone wants to get to China, they got to go either all the way around you or they got to go through you and pay, right? This is Angkor Wat. It's a building that's specifically mentioned by the College Board, so I would just be able to recognize it. This is what it looks like. And it's a great example of syncretism, right? It's a Hindu building, but then at some point the Khmer rulers converted to Buddhism, but they didn't like tear down the Hindu temple. They then just added like Buddhist elements, like Buddhist statues and stuff. So it's a really cool example of syncretism. This is like an Aztec tribute roll that's basically like a receipt of like, hey, here's this community paid their tribute for the year or whatever. Here's what they gave us. This is Mansa Musa, right? The king of Mali. He's being depicted. This is actually in a Catalan atlas that was made by Spain, which is really cool. That image of like Marco Polo that we just saw is from that too. And so he really dominates the gold silk trade in his city of Timbuktu because he's like a stopping point from sub-Saharan Africa across the desert into North Africa. So again, the exception is medieval Europe. So if nothing else in this time period, it's like if most of the states are doing the same thing, like if most of the states are like, yeah, great, we're like super, big on these regional trade routes and we're very involved in blah, blah, blah. Great, know a few examples of that. And then if there's an exception, make sure you know that. If there's like a weird one where you're like, oh, that's something totally different, then know that. And so medieval Europe is the weird one, right? Because they go the other way. They become completely isolated in terms of trade. They go into minoralism where like you're born and you die and you never go more than 6 miles from the place you were born, right? And they're completely like self-sufficient on these manors and estates. Now, by the end, they are starting to connect back together. But again, this just makes them sort of the exception that they like lose their way for a little bit. It's okay. I do show kids the Mansa Musa song. Yes, I would love to go to Angkor Wat. If anyone wants to go with me, let me know. The Yuan dynasty, Tracy, is the Mongol dynasty in China. It's just the Chinese name for the Mongol dynasty. So it's, again, late 1200s, early 1300s. If you just remember that right around 1300 and a little bit before, a little bit after is like Mongol time, then that's really helpful, right? Because if you get any sort of document or whatever, you can sort of place it. All right. Yes, Kami, you're right. Okay, the other part of this era is just the trade routes. And so we're still talking about the same civilizations, but the focus for Unit 2 is on the trade routes that connected them and then on like the specific trading cities that rose. You do not need to know all these trading cities. What I tell my students, and again, these maps are on my website, antisocialstudies.org. What I tell my students is like, you might look at this map and just be able to like recognize, be like, if you saw Kashgar, your brain would go, trading city, right? From this era. Like, you don't need to know, you don't need to be able to place it on a map. There's no mapping portion of the test, whatever. But like, you might be given a multiple choice stimulus, right? A document that's like talking about like, and then I entered Kashgar and I saw an oasis of blah, 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 blah. And like, it might be helpful to know, okay, right, this is like a kind of a question about trading cities and trade and whatever. Honestly, if they give you something like that on the test, normally in the sourcing information, which you should always read, they will say like Kashgar was a trading city in Central Asia, right? But just in case, I think it's helpful to at least be able to see these and kind of recognize them. So with the different trade routes, these are the trade routes. This is like the basics of what you need to know, not to way oversimplify it, but we're talking about 3 main trade routes. And really, if nothing else, you would want to know, okay, what are the specific innovations that helped those trade routes expand? And then what did they trade? What types of stuff did they trade? And you don't need to memorize every single spice, but like you might want to know kind of generally. So really, like what it is if it's a land-based trade route, if it's the Sahara or the Silk Road, then their innovations that are most helpful are going to be things that make traveling lighter and like you have to walk less. That's it, right? The camel saddle is like, I can now ride my camel instead of having to walk beside him or her, right? Caravans make it safer. You travel in groups. Caravanserai, right? And all of these are helpful also on the Silk Road, by the way. Camels are helpful on both. Camels are the best. Confusingly, camels are the goat. So, caravanserai are like, you know, safe kind of basically hotels, right? It's like a roadside motel where you know it's safe, you know you'll be protected so that you can kind of like sleep sound. Your camels can eat or drink whatever camels eat, and then you can go on your way. Notice the Silk Road, a lot of it is about like also being able to carry things more lightly, right? Because if you're carrying things and if your camel is carrying things, you don't want to be carrying a bunch of gold coins, right? Famously, like the Chinese and some other states had gold coins that then had holes in the middle so you could put a string in the middle and like wrap them around your neck, but that's really heavy. And so the Chinese invent and kind of innovate paper money. Keep in mind that like paper money is not the way we think of it today because not everyone accepts paper money, right? So paper money is only acceptable if you're like within that same civilization. So it's not like they invent the dollar bill and now all of a sudden everyone's trading with money. It's still mostly goods, like bartering back and forth. But they're starting to have these ideas about, at least within a civilization, within China, you can have a banknote that's stamped by the Song dynasty or the Yuan dynasty and be like, cool, this is good anywhere where the Yuan dynasty is in charge. Right? Same thing with banking houses and bills of exchange, right? Banking houses kind of rise up in medieval Europe because of the Crusades, partly the Knights Templar. Hey, conspiracy theories, if you want to go down some rabbit holes. So the Knights Templar were like this group of crusading knights that wanted to help finance other people to go reconquer the Holy Land. So they would set up a banking house, a place where you could go and you'd be like, hey, I have a group of good Christian men who we want to go off crusading and we need financing. And they'd be like, awesome, you're going to pay us X% of whatever loot you come back with. And then they would give them a bill of exchange. And they would say, take this, and when you get to Constantinople, find our Knights Templar banking establishment there, and turn this in, and you'll get your stuff to go off crusading. When the Christians controlled Jerusalem, there was one there. So it's like a modern day bank, sort of, right? On the Indian Ocean, you'll notice that a lot of the technology is about navigation. Again, this is also applicable for the Silk Road too. I mean, when you're in the middle of the desert, a compass is quite helpful. But a lot of these innovations are about knowing where you are. The biggest one is like harnessing the monsoon winds. My kids always make fun of me. I talk about lateen sails for like 3 years in our class. And they're also about in creating new ships that can carry more things. So the Chinese junk ship is like, it's this, and it's huge. It's like the largest ship that has existed in the world up until this point, and they can carry a lot of stuff. So the other thing in terms of what is being carried, just think about it logically, and like a camel can carry less than a boat. So if it's a land-based trade route, they're mostly going to specialize in luxury goods. It needs to be really worth it to like go take that camel caravan. So like silk, spices, porcelain, textiles, things that are lighter, gold, salt, ivory, unfortunately also enslaved people to also carry some of those luxury goods. Whereas the Indian Ocean, you can throw a bunch of stuff on a ship, right? And so this is where you also see like horses right, are being traded around. And you have like kind of the Mongol horses then being traded to other places. You have stonework. You again have enslaved people. But you have bulk goods and luxury goods as well. Just skimming through the chat. All right. Also, I saw someone, I think, talking about Unit 9 in the chat. Don't worry, Unit 9 is another one that's kind of de-emphasized on the test. So that's why I made a few videos covering it. But there seems to be an unspoken agreement amongst AP teachers in the College Board that, like, we're like, hey, don't be a jerk. Don't, like, make the whole DBQ on Unit 9, because they know a lot of teachers are struggling to get there. So just know, if the DBQ is on Unit 9, there will be, like, a full-scale teacher rebellion. And so you can come along with us. Again, you need to know Unit 9, but, like, don't stress too much. Okay. The more important thing about Unit 2 is, like, the social and cultural impact of trade routes. You're probably not going to get a question that's going to be like, tell me about the different goods traded on this trade routes, because that's, like, kind of like, who cares? But you very well might get an LEQ or an SEQ that's like, talk about one instance of cultural diffusion or something like that. And so the easiest one to talk about is religion, right? Like, religion spreading. And really, like, the two best examples of that are going to be the spread of Islam along trade routes and the spread of Jewish communities along those trade routes. And they're for two different reasons. Muslims are they just actively promote trade way more than other civilizations. Most civilizations like China saw merchants as, like, very low. Like, you're not producing anything. What are you doing? You're just trading other people's stuff and making money off of it. The Muslims saw it differently, partly because Muhammad himself was a trader. He was a caravan trader. His first wife was Khadija, who was the boss of his camel caravan, right? So just by definition, they're like, if it was good enough for Muhammad, right, it's good enough for us. But also because they're universalizing religion, like Buddhists, they're like, yeah, the more people we can send out to trade and then also talk about Allah and that sort of thing, awesome. The Jews are, going to spread out along trade routes because they are forced out of places, right? So this goes all the way back to, like, the ancient diaspora, but in our time period, this is also them being expelled from medieval Christian kingdoms, right? And so, they're setting up these diasporic communities, right? This is a drawing or a depiction of a synagogue in Kaifeng, China, that's been around for like 1,000 years, right? So those two groups especially set up these diasporic communities. A lot of times on the AP test, I see there are these really cool letters that are like, it might be like a Jew living in India writing to his cousin living in China or living back in the Middle East. And, like, it's always along the lines of, like, okay, this cultural diffusion, and you're bringing your culture and spreading it. We also see the spread of, like, languages. So a great example of this would be Swahili on the East Coast, which is a syncretic language. So, like, Swahili comes about, and it's a mix between... sorry, my thing's not being weird. It's a mix between African Bantu and Arabic. And so it's a great example of, like, hey, okay, as you have African traders along the east coast of Africa and Arab traders coming and setting up, they're going to, like, start to share words with each other and eventually create a language. Also, all the names in The Lion King are Swahili. Fun fact. Simba means lion in Swahili. Mufasa means king. Anyway, so those are some good examples of that. You also see, obviously, the spread of innovation. This is showing how much better Arabic numerals were. So this is a dude doing math with Arabic numerals, like the numbers we think of today, and this is a guy using an abacus, and look how sad he looks. He's like, oh, this is really hard, right? So the fact that even just, like, if we want to know why Europe in the next time period is all of a sudden going to be like, hey, science, it's like, hey, Renaissance. It's because of the Asians. It's because Asians did it for them, right? It's like, actually, what we call Arabic numerals are actually Hindu numerals. They come from India, but they got sort of translated and explained through Dar al-Islam. So when they made it to Europe, everyone was like, oh, they came from the Arabs, so they're Arabic numerals, right? And that's like what we see today of like 1, 2, 3, as opposed to, imagine trying to do calculus with Roman numerals. I'd rather do literally anything else in the world, right? Okay. Let's see. The spread of the printing press to Europe by the well, the spread of printing technology from China. Yes, the spread of like paper, of woodblock printing, and then those are going to all kind of mix together. And at the very beginning of the next era, it's going to be like Gutenberg, right? So again, a lot of this, you should know some stuff about medieval Europe, but this is not a European history class. So like, you don't need to go into that much detail. For the most part, this era is just context within European history. It's context for like how they're going to come out of this in the next era. And first of all, they're going to be like, oh shoot, we need to catch up. Like, we're really behind all these other huge, powerful civilizations. We need to figure something out. We need to maybe start exploring. And also, they're then going to take all these innovations that have been made and preserved and whatever. They're going to kind of come along these trade routes, swirl around in Europe, and then eventually turn into like the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, that sort of thing. Okay. All right, the last few minutes, I'm going to scroll back through the chat and make sure that there's not something that y'all are like, oh my gosh, please tell me about this thing. Yeah, throw stuff in the chat. If there's any last minute thing that you really want me to talk about from units 1 and 2, let me know. The last thing obviously is trade routes are spreading like environmental factors that affect demographics, population. So that's in a positive way in that like champa rice. Let me go back to my map. So champa rice comes from Vietnam. And then it comes through the Champa state, which is in South Vietnam. Oh, that's a terrible color to pick for that. And then it is paid tribute, like they're a tributary state of the Song. So they give them Champa rice. Champa rice is a faster growing strain. You can grow 2 crops of rice in a year instead of 1. And so it's one of the many reasons why Song China is going to experience population explosion. It's not as simple as like rice, 100 million people, but like, you know, kind of. The other one too is bananas. Bananas are going to come from Southeast Asia over to Africa, and they replace. There were other whatever. Bananas come to sub-Saharan Africa, and they're very nutrient dense, and so they're also going to contribute to population boom kind of along the east coast of Africa, which helps explain the Swahili coast. Over in the Americas, you also have the crops of like maize in Mesoamerica, the potato. You also have sugar being kind of, that had been developed in the Middle East that makes its way to Europe. And they're going to be like, ooh, we like this. And then you're going to get tea from China. And the British are like, oh, we really like this. And then you should just be going like, watch out, Americas, it's going to be bad, right? So all of this is like, it's kind of fun to go back and study these eras because you're from the future and like, you know what's about to happen. So this is like watching a horror movie where you're like, no, don't give them gunpowder, because you know that the Europeans are about to take it and just like destroy everyone else, right? Okay. Let's see. The Bantu people, so the Bantu migration is way, way, way long ago, but just like as context, the Bantu kind of were a group of a lot of different kind of language groups and stuff that are all, it's kind of like saying like Romance languages, right? Like it all descended kind of from Latin from the Romans, but they're different. That's kind of what Bantu is. They, over thousands of years, slowly kind of populated sub-Saharan Africa. And so a lot of these cultures and languages in sub-Saharan Africa all have their roots in Bantu, but they're totally different languages, right? So, but again, that's not something that's on the test. That's older. And same like the Roman Empire, that sort of thing. It's not on the test. So we can have a fun day where we talk about the Roman Empire after the test is over. But yeah. So yeah, the success of the Song Dynasty, innovations. I mean, so they sacrifice military stability for openness and innovation, right? So that's kind of why they get conquered by the Mongols. So like, let's go back to my original map. The Song sort of openly, they put a lot of their money and a lot of their focus on innovation and trade, which makes them really successful, but it also leaves them vulnerable to attacks from Northerners. So first, actually, there's the first, like the Song Dynasty is this, it's big. And then a nomadic group from the north, and I'm blanking on the name, but it's not the Mongols, the Jurchens come and conquer them, and they're forced to flee, and their empire gets cut in half. And so they're forced to flee. They create a new, it's called the Southern Song down here, where they're like, okay, we'll just be smaller. We'll stay in our little thing and we'll just innovate a lot of stuff. And then, you know, foreboding music, the Mongols are coming, right? So, but their big successes are going to be, I mean, really the 4 great innovations of like paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass is huge. I mean, think about it. Those are the puzzle pieces that then are going to lead to the age of exploration and like kind of global conquest, right? One of the reasons too why they don't use those innovations to like go explore more is because they don't need to. Everyone's coming to them, and if they're like, they're fine. You know what I mean? And this is one of the things is that I sort of argue in my class that really Africa and Asia are sort of cursed. It's like a blessing and a curse because they're doing so well in this era. They control a lot of land. They're on these dominant trade routes. They don't really have any incentive to start going out and sending ships sailing out into the unknown. They're fine. The ships are all coming to them. And so it's like the narrative traditionally is that like the Europeans were just so brave and it was John Smith and blah, blah, blah. No. It's like the Europeans were so far behind everyone else. They were like, we're desperate. We got to do something crazy, right? The Europeans were like, we're never going to be able to like conquer China. We're never going to be able to go conquer India or conquer these massive Islamic states. They're like, we got to do something else. And so they just start like throwing things at the wall. They start throwing Columbus out in the ocean and then he bumps into the Americas, right? Like it's that they were so far behind and they just got really lucky because they stumbled into a huge land-based empire that they really shouldn't have had, right? Or didn't, weren't trying to do. So again, in this time period, we're like setting the groundwork for that. And we're setting the groundwork, but it's like the main focus is like powerful land-based empires that are controlling trade routes. That's it. And then you have like periphery states that are like the intermediaries, like, hey, you want to get to China, you got to come through this strait, that sort of thing. But again, if you only have space in your brain to study a few things from Unit 1 and 2, I would study Song Dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate. I would pick one of the American civilizations, Aztec or Inca, and I would do maybe Mali and the Swahili coast. Like I would do those 5, right? If you only have room in your brain for a few. And then as far as trade routes go, I would focus almost all of your time on just like the impact of those trade routes. You do not need to commit to memory like, well, the Indian Ocean was stonework and blah, 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 right? I would focus most of your time on the impact. Cultures are spreading, people are moving around, languages are mixing together. You also, someone mentioned way earlier, you have other nomadic groups coming in. This era is the height of nomadic groups' power in the world. They've like reached, this is when they're the most important. The best example is obviously the Mongols, but also you have like the sea nomads that are kind of operating a lot of these trade routes. You have groups like the Seljuk Turks who come kind of from Central Asia and they come into the Abbasid Caliphate and first they're just like, you need help defending your territory? And the Abbasids are like, yes, please. And so they start fighting in their military. Eventually they're just going to take over. The Mamluks too were enslaved people that then rebelled and created their own state. And all of this is in the midst of the chaos of the Crusades, right? Like, so the kind of Dar al-Islam by the 1200s, by the 1300s, before the Mongols come in, is already breaking apart. You have Crusaders coming, you have the Seljuk Turks, you have the Mamluks rebelling. It's kind of a mess. And then the Mongols just come in and like wipe the slate clean. And we're just like, okay, let's start over. Like, so in a lot of ways, the Mongols make things pretty easy for us because it's like all of these civilizations, I'm not meaning to laugh, but like are just gone. And they sort of like wipe Africa, Asia, North Africa and Asia clean, Mongol conquest. And then we'll come back to them next week and we'll talk about like the empires that rose out of them, which are going to be like the gunpowder empires. So, Okay. Yeah, and y'all are getting at some great questions about like Zheng He. Zheng He's technically in this time period because he's like the 1410s or 20s, but you should probably more consider him in the other time period because he's part of like the age of exploration. But yeah, just know that like when the Mongols fall apart, the Ming are going to come in and set up Ming China, and they do send out Zheng He. It's one emperor sends out Zheng He. The rest of the Ming dynasty is like, what are we doing? We're China. And they literally like burn their ships and stuff. So that's good context. It's good to know that's kind of right at the end of this time period. These time periods are slightly loose in terms of like, they're more thematic, right? So really when we're talking about 1200 to 1450, we're talking about like these states and these empires. Then 1450 through 1750 is like age of exploration, that sort of thing. So I normally talk about Zheng He in that era, but you're right that technically he's like right at the end of this one. Okay. Woo! That's units 1 and 2. This video will be recorded. It is being recorded, and it'll be saved. So if you want to go back and reference it and play it in double speed or whatever, feel free to do that. Spread it around to your friends who weren't able to be here tonight if you're feeling very nice to them. Make sure if you would like this video, and if you haven't already subscribed, please do. I'm trying to like Heimler. I mean, I keep trying to talk smack to Steve Heimler, but like, I need more subscribers, y'all. I can't keep talking smack to Steve. So with that, make sure that you spread the word. Tell your friends about these review sessions. Even if they can't make it live, they can come watch them later. The benefit of live, obviously, is that you have the chat where you can ask me questions, and hopefully I saw them and hopefully I answered your questions, but if not, you can reach me in a lot of different ways. I'll do my best to respond. So make sure that you're following me on Instagram. DM me on Instagram. I'll do my best to respond. On TikTok, I'm doing daily reviews. So we've made it on TikTok to Unit 5. We just started talking about the Enlightenment and revolutions. It's 1 video a day for AP World. And then obviously I'll be doing more stuff on YouTube. If you're interested and you want to watch me walk through a DBQ, this Saturday, I'm going to be on the Marco Learning YouTube channel. So if you haven't already, I would also subscribe to Marco Learning. On Saturday I'll post about it on Instagram. I think it's at 1 p.m. Central. I'm going to just live walk through a DBQ. I'm going to pull up a DBQ none of us have ever seen before because I just made it. And we're going to walk through step by step and like make a DBQ together. So if you want to walk through that process, make sure that you go subscribe to the Marco Learning YouTube channel. Daniel, it was really good to sort of see you. All right. Thanks, y'all.